Why are we paying him this much? Marcus Chen's voice carried through the glass walls of the executive suite, loud enough for half the floor to hear. He was holding up a spreadsheet like it was evidence at a trial, jabbing his finger at numbers that represented 15 years of my life. I stood 20 feet away at the coffee station, frozen mid-pour. Through the transparent conference room walls, I could see him, our new VP of Operations, 32 years old, Stanford MBA still fresh on his LinkedIn profile. 6 weeks at the company and already swinging axes. This is absurd, he continued, turning to face our CFO and 2 board members. We're hemorrhaging resources on legacy positions. This restructuring is long overdue. I didn't move, didn't react. I'd seen this performance before at other companies, watched from the sidelines as new executives proved their worth by cutting what they couldn't understand. But this time, I wasn't on the sidelines. What Marcus didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that 3 years ago, when Silvercrest Capital acquired our company, my attorney had negotiated something special into my contract. Something buried in Section 8.4. Subsection C, something I'd warned them about in writing exactly 2 weeks ago. Legal had ignored it. HR had filed it away. And now, as I watched Marcus circle my salary like a shark around blood, I knew we were about to find out exactly what happens when you don't read the fine print. By the next morning, the company would discover they hadn't just eliminated a position. They triggered a contractual cascade that would cost them $1.7 billion in client withdrawals, regulatory exposure, and accelerated compensation clauses. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story of corporate miscalculation and contractual justice, hit that subscribe button. I share workplace revenge stories 3 times a week, and trust me, this one gets even better. My name is David Morrison, and 6 months ago I was the Director of Regulatory Compliance and Risk Architecture at Meridian Analytics, a financial data services company based in Chicago. Not the kind of title that impresses people at parties, but the kind that keeps a $4.2 billion company from imploding under federal scrutiny. I'm 46 years old. I started in this industry right out of Northwestern, spent 8 years at the SEC as a field examiner, then moved into private sector compliance. Meridian hired me away from a competitor in 2008, right after the financial crisis when regulatory oversight became everyone's nightmare. My wife, Rebecca, teaches literature at a private high school in Evanston. Our twin daughters, Sophia and Olivia, are juniors at the University of Michigan studying computer science and economics respectively. Between their tuition, our mortgage, and the comfortable middle-class life we'd built over 2 decades, my $620,000 annual compensation package wasn't extravagant, it was necessary. What I did at Meridian wasn't glamorous. I didn't close deals or manage P&L statements. I built and maintained the invisible infrastructure that kept us compliant with 17 different regulatory bodies across federal and state jurisdictions. SEC, FINRA, state banking commissioners, data privacy authorities, each one with their own requirements, reporting schedules, and enforcement histories. I knew which examiner at which agency cared about which specific compliance markers. I knew which regulations had teeth and which ones were performative. I knew how to structure our systems so that when auditors arrived unannounced, everything they needed was already organized, documented, and defensible. That knowledge doesn't transfer easily. It doesn't fit in a training manual or a knowledge management database. It lives in pattern recognition developed over 18 years of watching regulatory environments evolve, understanding enforcement priorities shift, and building relationships with the people who actually make decisions. Meridian's client base consisted of 47 institutional investors managing a combined $890 billion in assets. Pension funds, endowments, sovereign wealth funds, insurance companies, entities that couldn't afford even the appearance of regulatory uncertainty. They didn't just buy our analytics services. They bought our compliance reputation. And that reputation rested almost entirely on frameworks I'd designed, and relationships I'd cultivated. None of this mattered to Marcus Chen when he arrived last September. He'd been hired as VP of Operations directly by our new CEO, Catherine Walsh, who joined 6 months earlier after the Silvercrest acquisition. Catherine came from a tech background, not finance. She spoke fluently in terms like operational efficiency, scalable systems, and resource optimization. Marcus was her hire, her vision for modernizing what she called our antiquated cost structure. I first met him during an all-hands operations meeting in late September. He stood at the front of our largest conference room wearing an expensive suit and the kind of confidence that comes from never having failed at anything important. "I've spent my first 30 days conducting a comprehensive operational audit," he announced, clicking through a presentation that reduced 15 years of institutional knowledge into bar charts and expense ratios. "What I've found is significant opportunity for structural improvement." He talked about automation, AI-driven compliance monitoring, and eliminating redundant human oversight. He showed slides comparing our compliance costs to industry benchmarks, carefully selected benchmarks from companies that had either been fined heavily or hadn't existed long enough to face serious regulatory scrutiny. "We're overstaffed in legacy functions," he said, his eyes scanning the room with practiced concern. "Not because anyone's failed, but because we haven't evolved our approach to match modern capabilities." After the meeting, he stopped me in the hallway. "David, right?" He extended his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'd like to schedule some time with you next week. Deep dive into your department's structure and deliverables." "Sure," I said. "Happy to walk through our compliance architecture." "Great. And bring documentation on your systems. I want to understand what can be automated and what truly requires human judgment." That conversation should have been my first warning, but I'd survived 3 acquisitions, 5 CEOs, and countless reorganizations. I knew how to document value, how to demonstrate necessity. I wasn't worried. I should have been. The meeting happened the following Tuesday in Marcus's new office on the executive floor. He'd already redecorated minimalist furniture, a standing desk, 2 large monitors displaying real-time operational metrics he probably didn't fully understand. "David, thanks for coming." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "I've been reviewing your department's budget allocation. Walk me through why compliance requires this level of investment." I spent 40 minutes explaining our regulatory landscape, the jurisdictional complexity, the relationship management with 23 different agency contacts, the customized reporting frameworks for each client segment, the audit preparation protocols that had kept us violation-free for 9 consecutive years. He nodded occasionally, taking notes on his iPad, asking questions that sounded thoughtful but revealed fundamental gaps in understanding. "Couldn't most of this monitoring be handled by reg tech platforms?" he asked. "I've been briefed on several vendors who offer AI-driven compliance solutions at a fraction of current costs." "Those platforms are tools," I explained patiently. "They're useful for data aggregation and initial screening, but regulatory compliance isn't just about checking boxes. It's about judgment calls on gray areas, relationship management when issues arise, and institutional knowledge about how different regulators prioritize different concerns." "Give me an example." "Last year, we had a data reporting anomaly with one of our pension fund clients. The raw numbers looked fine, but I noticed a pattern inconsistency that suggested a calculation error in their upstream systems, not ours. An automated system would have flagged it as compliant and moved on. Instead, I called their compliance director, walked through my analysis, and we discovered they had a vendor integration problem that would have cascaded into a major ERISA violation within 90 days. And they appreciated that. They renewed their contract for 3 years and increased their service tier. That account is worth $14 million annually." Marcus made another note. "Interesting, but sustainable." That word sustainable became his favorite over the following weeks. Every conversation, every email, every casual hallway interaction eventually circled back to whether my role, my team, my entire approach was sustainable given the company's evolution. I started documenting everything. Every question he asked, every suggestion he made, every hint that my position was being evaluated not for performance but for cost. In early November, I had lunch with an old colleague, Robert Chen, who'd recently left a competitor after their compliance director was terminated during a restructuring. "Let me guess," Robert said after I described Marcus's questions. "New executive, consulting background, thinks compliance is a software subscription. Basically, David, they fired our director 3 months ago, replaced him with a cheaper manager and a reg tech platform. Know what happened last month?" "What?" "FINRA showed up for a spot examination, found 18 documentation gaps, 7 reporting inconsistencies, and 2 potential material violations. We're looking at fines in the 8-figure range, plus we lost 2 major clients who cited compliance concerns in their termination letters." Jesus. The director tried to warn them during his exit interview, documented everything. They didn't care. They were saving $400,000 a year on salary. Now they're facing $20 million in fines and another $30 million in lost revenue. I drove back to the office thinking about that conversation. That night I pulled out my employment contract and read through it carefully for the first time in 3 years. Section 8.4, subsection C jumped out immediately. It was language my attorney, Patricia Owens, had negotiated during the Silvercrest acquisition. At the time, the private equity firm's due diligence team had flagged significant key person risk in my role. The language was their protection mechanism. If my position was eliminated or materially restructured without following specific protocols including a 180-day transition period, board approval, and documented risk mitigation, it triggered automatic acceleration of all deferred compensation, unvested equity, and performance bonuses tied to client retention metrics. More importantly, it included penalty provisions if my departure caused client contract disruptions. Several of our largest institutional clients had continuity clauses requiring notification and approval of changes to senior compliance personnel. Those clauses weren't suggestions. They were contractual rights with termination provisions. I'd warned Silvercrest about this during the acquisition. They'd built these protections specifically because they understood what would happen if institutional knowledge concentrated in key roles disappeared suddenly. But that was 3 years ago. New leadership. New priorities. New executives who hadn't been part of those negotiations. On November 15th, I sent a formal memo to Marcus, Catherine Walsh, our General Counsel Amanda Rivers, and our board liaison. Subject line: Compliance role restructuring contractual considerations. I outlined Section 8.4(c) explicitly. I detailed the client contract implications. I attached a risk assessment showing potential exposure if my role was eliminated without proper protocols. Marcus responded within 2 hours via email. "Thanks for the input. We'll take this under advisement." Amanda Rivers, our General Counsel, sent a separate note. "David, I'll review the contractual language and coordinate with HR. Appreciate the heads up." That was it. No follow-up meeting, no detailed review, just acknowledgement and filing away. 2 weeks later, I received a calendar invitation. Strategic Workforce Planning Session, Executive Conference Room, All Leadership. Date December 3rd. Time 9:00 a.m. I knew what was coming. The choreography was too familiar. These meetings aren't discussions, they're executions with witnesses. The night before, I sat in my home office in Evanston reviewing my documentation. Rebecca came in around 10 p.m. with tea. "You're still up," she said, setting the mug on my desk. "Just preparing for tomorrow." The meeting. She'd heard enough of my phone calls with Patricia over the past month to know something significant was building. "Yeah. Are they going to let you go?" "Probably going to try." She sat in the chair across from me. "David, we'll be fine. You know that, right? We've got savings. You'll find something else. Your reputation is solid." "I know," I said, "but this isn't about finding something else. This is about them understanding what they're actually eliminating." "What do you mean?" I showed her the contract language, explained the exposure calculations Patricia had prepared, walked through the client contract implications. Rebecca read through everything silently, then looked up. They really didn't pay attention to any of this. New leadership. They weren't part of the original negotiations, And Marcus has been here 6 weeks. He sees numbers on a spreadsheet, not systems that protect those numbers. So what happens tomorrow? Tomorrow, they learn what expensive really means. I arrived at the office at 8:30 a.m. The executive conference room was on the 14th floor, glass walls offering views of Lake Michigan and the Chicago skyline. Beautiful setting for what was essentially a corporate firing squad. The room filled quickly. Catherine Walsh at the head of the table, Marcus Chen to her right with his laptop already connected to the display screen. Amanda Rivers reviewing documents on her tablet. 3 Silvercrest board observers, including their lead investment director, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer Park who'd been asking increasingly pointed questions during quarterly reviews. Our CFO, Thomas Wright, looked distinctly uncomfortable, adjusting his glasses repeatedly and avoiding eye contact. Marcus stood and smiled. "Good morning, everyone. Thanks for making time for this workforce optimization session." As we head into year-end planning, it's essential we examine our operational structure with fresh perspective. First slide appeared: Operational Excellence Through Strategic Restructuring. Today's discussion focuses on legacy operational roles that may no longer align with our growth trajectory and modern capabilities. Next slide showed departmental expense breakdown. Compliance represented 28% of operational overhead, highlighted in red with an arrow pointing to my position specifically. "Now, I want to be clear," Marcus continued, his tone carefully modulated. "This isn't about individual performance. David Morrison has been a valued contributor. However, compliance technology has advanced significantly. Automated platforms can now handle regulatory monitoring with 99.8% accuracy at a fraction of current costs. Past tense again, has been a valued contributor, not is." Another slide appeared: Compliance Modernization Roadmap. Phase 3 showed legacy role elimination, estimated annual savings, $680,000. No name, just the function. But the room knew exactly who that meant. Jennifer Park from Silvercrest spoke up. "Guess what's the transition timeline here?" "Excellent question. We're proposing a 60-day knowledge transfer to our new compliance manager, with full transition to automated systems by February 1st. 60 days. Not the 180 required by my contract." Amanda Rivers raised her hand slightly. "Have we reviewed the contractual implications of this restructuring?" "HR has confirmed all employment agreements include standard termination provisions," Marcus replied smoothly. "This is a business efficiency decision, fully within our operational authority." Standard provisions. He clearly hadn't read Section 8(4)(c). "Any other questions before we move to implementation details?" Marcus asked, scanning the room with that practiced confidence. I could have stayed silent. Let them continue their presentation, sign their documents, congratulate themselves on decisive leadership. But sometimes the best tactical response is the one they don't see coming. I stood slowly, reached into my briefcase and placed a sealed envelope on the table in front of Catherine Walsh. "I'd like to save everyone some time," I said calmly. The room went silent. Marcus's confident expression flickered. "David, there's no need for dramatics," Catherine said, trying to maintain control. "We haven't even discussed the transition support package yet." I removed my building access badge and placed it on top of the envelope. The plastic hitting wood made a sharp click in the silence. "Inside that envelope is my resignation, effective immediately," I said, looking directly at Catherine. "Also included is a copy of Section 8.4, subsection C of my employment agreement, along with an analysis prepared by my attorney regarding contractual exposure. I believe your legal team will want to review this carefully." Amanda Rivers had already reached for the envelope. She opened it, scanned the first page, then flipped to the contract excerpt. I watched her face change, eyes widening slightly, jaw tightening. "What does it say?" Catherine asked, her voice sharp. Amanda looked at Marcus, then at Jennifer Park, then back at the document. "It's a key person protection clause. If David's role is terminated or materially restructured without a 180-day transition period and board approval, it triggers immediate acceleration of all deferred compensation, unvested equity and performance bonuses. The room went completely quiet except for the heating system cycling on. "How much acceleration?" Thomas Wright asked, his voice strained. Amanda was still reading, her finger tracing lines of text. 5 years of deferred performance bonuses indexed to client retention metrics, equity adjustments tied to firm valuation, plus. Oh, she paused, reading more carefully. Plus penalty provisions if his departure causes client contract disruptions. Several of our major institutional clients have termination rights if senior compliance personnel change without notification and approval. Marcus had gone pale. That wasn't in the HR summary. "Because HR doesn't review executive protection clauses," Amanda said quietly. "Those are negotiated directly during acquisitions and held by legal." I pushed my chair back. "Thank you for the opportunity. I wish everyone stability in the coming weeks." As I walked toward the door, I heard Catherine's voice, tight and controlled. "Amanda, what's our exposure here?" I didn't wait for the answer. The door closed behind me with a soft click. By the time I reached the parking garage, my phone was buzzing. 4 missed calls from numbers I recognized but didn't answer. There's a specific window after a decision like this: too early for consequences, too late for prevention. I sat in my Audi for a moment, looking back at the Meridian building. 22 floors of glass and steel housing 840 employees who had no idea what was about to unfold. I pulled out my personal phone and called Rebecca. "Hey," her voice was warm, probably between classes. "I resigned," I said simply. A pause. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, better than okay, actually. Can you come home early? I think we should talk through what happens next." "David, you're worrying me. What's going on?" "Nothing to worry about. Just things are about to get complicated at Meridian, and I want you to understand the full picture before it hits the news." After we hung up, I drove home through Chicago traffic in unusual quiet. No music, no podcasts, just the anticipation of watching a carefully constructed system execute exactly as designed. Back in that conference room, I knew what was happening without being there. Legal teams don't panic visibly. They panic methodically, with spreadsheets and liability assessments and urgent calls to outside counsel. Amanda would be pulling contract files, calling Silvercrest's legal team, running calculations that got worse with every iteration. That afternoon, my former colleague James Liu texted from his personal phone. "Emergency all-hands legal meeting." "What the hell did you do?" I texted back. "Read my contract, Section 8(4)(c). Holy shit." By 5 p.m., the first client inquiry had arrived. Not to me, but to Meridian's compliance inbox. Illinois Teachers' Retirement System, managing $62 billion in assets, asking a simple question: who was now certifying their quarterly regulatory filings? There was no answer. Nobody else at Meridian held the specific certifications required. My replacement would need minimum 18 months of training and examination to achieve the same credentials, assuming they could find someone with the right background. Another message followed from the California Public Employees Retirement Fund. Were their contract continuity provisions still satisfied under the new compliance structure? Those provisions, buried in a 600-page master service agreement, referenced my position and certifications explicitly. Not my name, but the function I held. At 8:45 p.m., Patricia called. "David, I've been reviewing the situation. This Section 8(4)(c) is executing exactly as written." "I know. Are you prepared for full enforcement? The exposure calculation is significant." "What are the current numbers?" I heard papers shuffling. "Direct compensation acceleration if triggered immediately, approximately $8.2 million. But that's before secondary effects." Secondary effects. Client contract clauses. 5 of your largest institutional clients have termination rights if you leave without proper transition protocols. I'm seeing potential exposure in the hundreds of millions if this cascades. Inside Meridian, Marcus was likely arguing with anyone who would listen that I had resigned voluntarily, that nothing had technically changed, that contract language could be interpreted flexibly. But contracts don't interpret themselves. They execute based on clear triggers. The clause wasn't punitive. It was protective, written during the Silvercrest acquisition when due diligence had revealed dangerous concentration of institutional knowledge in my specific role. If that role ended without proper protocols, automatic safeguards activated. By midnight, finance had run initial scenarios. By Friday morning, they ran them again. Each time, the exposure grew as they discovered additional contractual linkages. What nobody had anticipated was the network effect. My role wasn't isolated. It was referenced directly or indirectly in continuity provisions across multiple client agreements. Those agreements had cross-default language disruption in one area created leverage in another. Illinois teachers, for example, had a clause allowing asset withdrawal if their designated compliance contact was removed without 180 days notice and board approval. Their account, $140 million annually in service fees. California public employees had similar language triggered by changes to senior compliance personnel. Their exposure, $220 million annually. When you build systems to survive regulatory stress, those same systems become unforgiving when stress is introduced artificially. Friday afternoon, Catherine Walsh called from her personal cell. "David, we need to talk. I'm listening. This situation has escalated significantly. Legal is projecting exposure that could exceed 9 figures if clients start exercising termination rights. That seems possible." A long pause. "Is there a way to resolve this? Some kind of arrangement that satisfies the contractual requirements?" I was sitting in my home office, watching snow fall over our backyard. Normal Friday in suburban Evanston, while downtown Chicago was probably in full crisis mode. "Catherine, the contract is very specific. Once triggered, it resolves through either full execution or litigation. There's no middle ground." "What would execution look like?" "Full acceleration of all deferred compensation plus penalties, plus whatever client attrition occurs naturally." "And litigation?" "Would freeze all affected client accounts pending resolution, trigger additional default clauses, and probably involve SEC oversight since it affects public pension assets." Another long pause. "David, how did we miss this?" "You didn't miss it, Catherine. You were warned in writing 2 weeks ago. You chose not to take it seriously." After I hung up, Rebecca came into the office. "That was Catherine." "Yeah. What did she want?" "To know if there's a way out." "Is there?" I showed her the contract language again, the exposure calculations Patricia had sent. "Only one way out. Pay what's owed and hope clients don't leave anyway." By Monday morning, the number had stabilized at $1.7 billion in total projected exposure, not theoretical anymore. It was a recalculation of Meridian's entire enterprise value. The board convened an emergency session Monday evening. I wasn't invited, but I could imagine it clearly. Closed conference room, catered dinner nobody touched, slow realization settling over everyone. Jennifer Park from Silvercrest would have asked the obvious question: how did we miss this during due diligence? The answer was simple. They hadn't missed it during the original acquisition. They'd built these protections specifically because they understood the risk, but new leadership had ignored institutional memory. Marcus reportedly argued until his voice failed that the clause was excessive, unintentional, that no one could have predicted this scale. But Amanda didn't argue back. She didn't need to. Contracts don't care about intention. The call came Tuesday evening. Robert Sheffield, Silvercrest's managing partner, a man whose name rarely appeared publicly but whose decisions shaped billions in private equity investments. "David, thank you for taking my call." His voice was measured, practiced. "I've been briefed on the situation. The board recognizes there were significant failures in how this restructuring was handled." Significant failures. Corporate speak for catastrophic miscalculation. "We'd like to resolve this efficiently," he continued, "in a way that reflects your contributions and minimizes disruption to our clients and investors." "My attorney has outlined the terms required for resolution," I said calmly. A pause. "Yes, we've reviewed them. One question: if we execute full settlement, does the client cascade stop?" Fair question. I respected the directness. "If executed within the contractual window and properly communicated to affected clients, yes." All continuity provisions can be satisfied. We'll proceed. The next 72 hours moved faster than the previous month combined. Credit lines were adjusted. Internal communications were carefully drafted. External announcements were prepared and reviewed by 3 law firms. Marcus Chen's name stopped appearing on company-wide emails. He wasn't terminated. That would create additional exposure. He was transitioned to an advisory role supporting special projects, corporate purgatory. When the final paperwork was signed Friday morning, Patricia sent a text. Executed in full. Cascade contained. Congratulations. I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee, reading the Tribune's business section. Rebecca had already left for school. Normal Friday morning in suburbia, while downtown Chicago was processing an $8.2 million settlement to avoid a $1.7 billion catastrophe. Victory isn't loud when it's earned through preparation. There's no celebration, just quiet satisfaction that careful planning met opportunity exactly as designed. Within a week, discreet messages began arriving through my professional network, not from recruiters, from managing partners, chief investment officers, board chairs, people who understood exactly what had happened without needing detailed explanations. They didn't ask why I'd left Meridian. They asked what I could build for them. One conversation stood out. Catherine Brooks, founding partner at Apex Regulatory Solutions in Boston. We talked for 2 hours on a Wednesday morning while I sat in my home office. David, we don't need you to recreate what you did at Meridian, she said. We need you to design what comes next. Regulatory complexity is accelerating faster than most firms can adapt. We want to be ahead of that curve. What kind of structure are we discussing? Senior partner, equity stake, full autonomy to build your team. And David, she paused, your compensation package gets written by you, reviewed by our partnership, but never questioned by someone who thinks experience is a line item to cut. That was enough. 3 weeks later, Rebecca and I flew to Boston for contract signing. Apex's offices occupied 3 floors of a building overlooking Boston Harbor. Understated elegance, the kind of environment where serious professionals make serious decisions. During the signing, Catherine introduced me to their largest client, the New York State Common Retirement Fund managing $280 billion in assets. Their chief compliance officer, a thoughtful man named Richard Palmer, shook my hand warmly. We've been following your situation at Meridian, he said. Impressive contract work. We're looking forward to working with someone who understands that compliance isn't a software subscription. It's institutional knowledge that takes decades to build. 6 months later, sitting in my new office on the 19th floor overlooking Boston Harbor, I got a call from James Liu. He'd left Meridian 2 months after I did, along with 4 other senior managers. David, you should know Meridian just lost the Illinois teacher's account. They cited concerns about compliance continuity in their termination letter. I wasn't surprised. Once institutional confidence cracks, it spreads through professional networks like ice fracturing across a windshield. What's Marcus doing now? I asked. Last I heard, he took a position at a small consulting firm in Austin, Operations Strategy. Apparently he's become very thorough about reviewing employment contracts before recommending terminations. We both laughed. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the most memorable. That evening I called Sophia at Michigan. She was in her final semester, already accepted to law school. Dad, my friends keep asking about that article in Crane's Chicago Business. The one about you and Meridian. They want to know if you're like rich now or something. We're comfortable, sweetheart. Your tuition's covered. Olivia's covered. Your mom doesn't have to worry about finances. That's what matters. But are you happy? I mean, really happy with how everything turned out? I looked out my office window at Boston Harbor, then at the photo on my desk, Rebecca, Sophia, Olivia, and our golden retriever Bailey in our backyard last summer. Yeah, I said. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing work that matters with people who understand what that means. These days, when I walk into client meetings, nobody asks how much I cost. They ask how much risk I can eliminate. They ask what I see coming that they don't. They ask for my analysis and then actually implement the recommendations. That difference matters more than $8.2 million ever could, because in the end, it was never about the money. It was never about revenge or vindication. It was about being valued for who you are, respected for what you know, and compensated fairly for what you protect. Sometimes you have to walk away from everything you've built to discover what you're actually worth. And sometimes, if you've prepared carefully enough, the system protects itself. Marcus Chen taught me an important lesson that day in the conference room, though not the one he intended. He taught me that the people who see you as a line item to eliminate are exactly the people you should never work for in the first place. And when you finally find people who see you as the solution instead of the problem, that's when you know you've made the right decision. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.